The Power of Walking Alone, a Stoic Guide to Self-Mastery, Solitude, and Unshakable Strength. Introduction. The Illusion of Power Through Others. You think power means being surrounded by people, advisors, allies, friends, smiling faces nodding along, clapping when you speak, raising glasses when you win. But tell me this. Why does it still burn when they leave? Why does it tear at your chest when the very hands that once lifted you now reach for your place, trying to take what you built? You chase the illusion of connection, desperately seeking influence because you believe it means safety, security, validation. But the higher you rise, the more clearly you see an uncomfortable truth. Power doesn't attract genuine loyalty. It exposes loyalty's limits. And those limits, they come fast, sharp, and unexpected, often from the one standing closest to you. The ancient Stoics warned us about this fundamental truth centuries ago. The nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength. Notice they didn't say applause. They didn't say validation or recognition or the approval of crowds. They said strength, real strength, the kind that stands unshaken in silence, not performing on stages for an audience. It listens far more than it speaks. It chooses solitude not because avoiding people is easy or comfortable, but because it's absolutely necessary for genuine growth and self-mastery. You want power? True power, the kind that can't be taken from you when circumstances change or people turn. First, you must learn to stand completely alone. Strip away all the noise that fills your days and clouds your thinking. Strip away the comfortable distractions that keep you from facing yourself. Then ask yourself, without the applause and the company, without the validation and the recognition, who are you really? What remains when everything external is removed? If that question unsettles you deeply, shakes you to your core, makes you want to look away, good. That discomfort is exactly where the true path begins. That's the doorway to genuine transformation. Consider this an invitation, not just to read or understand intellectually, but to walk a path that few have the courage to walk. This is for the part of you that's exhausted from pretending, tired of performing, weary of seeking external validation. This is for the part of you that's ready to rise, not in social status or public recognition, but in genuine self-mastery, in the kind of inner strength that no external circumstance can shake. This is the Stoic path, the way of the philosopher warrior, the path of those who choose to become truly free. Walk it with unwavering purpose. Walk it, if necessary, completely alone. 1. The journey upward, understanding why the crowd thins. At first, growth feels like a shared experience, a collective celebration. You take your first courageous steps towards something greater, something more aligned with your deepest values, and the world seems to cheer enthusiastically for you. The faces around you are warm and supportive, the voices reassuring and encouraging. Everyone loves the beginning of a journey. Everyone loves watching a climb that hasn't yet threatened their own position, their own comfort, their own sense of superiority or control. But as you keep moving steadily upward, as you continue choosing growth over comfort, you start to feel something subtle shifting, the weight of silence creeping in gradually, almost imperceptibly at first. This growing silence doesn't happen because you've transformed into someone cruel, cold, or distant. It happens because you've started making choices, conscious decisions about who you are and who you're becoming. You begin carefully selecting which voices you allow near your thoughts, which influences you permit to shape your decisions, which hands you trust near your life's work. And slowly, almost quietly, without any dramatic announcements or confrontations, the crowd becomes a smaller circle. Then that circle becomes a line. And then sometimes that line becomes just a shadow walking behind you, barely visible, barely present. The uncomfortable truth that nobody wants to acknowledge is this: power was never meant to be a group activity, never designed to be achieved through committees or consensus. It's not the result of how many people you can gather around you or how large your network appears. It's the result of how many people you have the strength and wisdom to walk away from. How many relationships you have the courage to outgrow when they no longer serve your highest purpose. The people who once supported you enthusiastically will often feel deeply betrayed, not because you actually harmed them or treated them badly, but because you grew and evolved without their permission, without their input, without their control. You made significant decisions they weren't part of. You pursued directions they didn't approve. You became someone they didn't expect or perhaps didn't want you to become. And in their eyes, from their limited perspective, that feels like disloyalty, like abandonment, like betrayal. But in truth, it's the only way genuine growth ever happens. Evolution requires leaving behind what no longer fits. Transformation demands that you outgrow your former self, and often the relationships that were built around that former self. Power, real power, demands clear boundaries. Not all at once in some dramatic gesture, but gradually, consistently, like a fortress being built brick by brick, decision by decision, thought by thought, until it becomes undeniably clear that not everyone is meant to enter your inner sanctum. Not everyone should have unrestricted access to your energy, your time, your mind, your vision. And here's where it gets genuinely uncomfortable, where most people turn back. The ones who complain the loudest about your distance, who accuse you most vocally of changing or becoming cold, are usually the very ones who benefited most from your previous closeness, from your lack of boundaries, from your people-pleasing tendencies. They weren't truly there for your discipline, your clarity, your vision, or your growth. They were there for the warmth of your fire, for what they could extract from your energy, for the light you provided that made them feel good about themselves. And when you stopped burning your own resources to keep them warm, when you stopped diminishing yourself to make them comfortable, they suddenly felt cold. They experienced your necessary boundaries as rejection. That's when the realization hits you like a thunderbolt. You didn't actually lose these people. You filtered them out without even consciously trying, without making any announcements or declarations. Your journey of growth began doing what all authentic transformations do. It started naturally removing what no longer aligns with who you're becoming. 2. Solitude as refinement, not rejection, but elevation. This natural filtering process isn't rejection in any cruel or vindictive sense. It's refinement, the necessary process of separating gold from dross, signal from noise. You don't need to explain it to anyone. You don't need to defend your choices or justify your boundaries to those who feel excluded. Because if you try, if you expend your precious energy attempting to make everyone understand and approve, you'll inevitably find yourself shrinking, making yourself smaller just to soothe someone else's discomfort with your evolution, with your growth, with the fact that you're no longer the person they thought they could keep in a box. And the very moment you do that, the instant you compromise your growth to maintain approval, you've already stepped down from the path you were meant to walk. You've traded your destiny for acceptance, your purpose for popularity, your truth for temporary peace. The loneliness that comes with this path is real, undeniable, but it's not the kind of loneliness people imagine when they hear the word. You're not aching desperately for more company, for more people to fill your calendar or your phone with meaningless interactions. You're yearning for something far more valuable, clearer air to breathe, purer space to think, deeper silence to listen to your own inner wisdom. You're seeking the kind of silence that sharpens your mind instead of softening it with comfortable distractions. The kind of sacred space where your deepest thoughts don't get constantly interrupted by noise that's only pretending to be support, by voices that offer advice without understanding, by energy that drains rather than enriches. And when you finally reach that profound level of stillness, when you stop filling every moment with activity and interaction, you begin to understand with crystalline clarity why the ancient Stoics valued solitude not as isolation, not as antisocial withdrawal, but as alignment, alignment with your true nature, with your deepest values, with reality itself. Marcus Aurelius, perhaps the most powerful man in the ancient world as Emperor of Rome, wrote in his private meditations, "The nearer a man comes to a calm mind, the closer he is to strength." And that profound calm, that unshakable inner peace, doesn't come in crowded rooms filled with competing egos and endless expectations. It doesn't emerge from constant social interaction or perpetual networking. It comes only when you make the courageous choice to value peace over popularity, stillness over applause, self-trust over external validation. This isn't about arrogance or superiority or thinking you're better than others. It's about responsibility, deep, profound responsibility for who you're becoming and what you're creating in this world. 3. The weight of carrying others. Why you can't take everyone with you. Every opinion as a suggestion, not a command. You learn to carry your own compass. Because once you've spent enough time listening to yourself in solitude, the noise of others starts to sound like static. Not evil, not threatening, just irrelevant. Power doesn't require a spotlight. It doesn't need a crowd chanting your name. It lives in the person who can sit alone with their decisions and not flinch. Who can lose approval and not panic? Who can walk away from praise and not look back for confirmation? That's real power, the kind that doesn't sway with popularity or crumble under pressure. And the people who reach this place, they're rarely loud. They're not explaining themselves. They're not chasing optics. They're just doing the work quietly, consistently, unbothered. You begin to realize the climb was never about being seen. It was about seeing clearly. And the higher you go, the less you need. The less you speak, the more you observe, the more you understand that true power isn't having influence over others. It's not needing it. It's being okay with not being understood, with being misread, with being alone, not as a punishment, but as a form of protection. And yet, even here, solitude isn't emptiness. It's presence. presence with your thoughts, your values, your direction. You see things as they are, not as others try to paint them. You don't get distracted by flattery or shaken by criticism. You listen, but you don't absorb everything. You engage, but you don't entangle. And that's the quiet discipline most people never reach. Not because they can't, but because they won't let go of the comfort that comes with being surrounded. What most people call loneliness, the powerful call alignment. And in that alignment, everything unnecessary falls away. Drama, distractions, performative support. You trade noise for peace, attention for clarity. You stop being available to everyone and start being deeply present for the few things that actually matter. And when you live that way long enough, you stop missing the crowd. You stop fearing the silence. You begin to see solitude not as something to escape, but as the very space where you become unshakable. So yes, power filters not with cruelty, with clarity. It separates what's essential from what's convenient, what strengthens you from what distracts you, what's real from what's performative. It's not about walking away from people. It's about walking toward your truth and accepting that most won't follow you there. And in the rare moments when someone does, you'll know they belong, not because they pushed to stay close, but because they chose the same silence, the same discipline, the same path. You won't need to explain it. You'll just know. That's the paradox of power. It doesn't grow louder. It grows cleaner, simpler, sharper, and the only way to reach it is to filter out what never belonged in the first place. Connection is a beautiful thing until you begin to understand what it truly costs. We grow up believing that to be loved, to be trusted, to be accepted, we must open ourselves up, show our emotions, reveal our stories, let others in. And at first that seems like strength. Vulnerability feels noble, honest, human. But as you step into positions of influence, something shifts. You begin to see how every shared weakness can become a weapon. Every revealed doubt becomes someone else's leverage. What once made you relatable now makes you exposed. And suddenly being seen doesn't feel safe anymore. It feels like risk. A risk you can't afford to take if you're carrying the weight of something bigger than yourself. It doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you stop displaying. Because in the eyes of others, especially those watching from the outside, your emotions aren't just expressions. They're signals. And signals, when read by the wrong person, invite challenges. Some will test your patience just to watch you crack. Others will comfort you while quietly recalibrating how they perceive your strength. Vulnerability becomes a performance review. And even when people say, I want honesty, what they often mean is, give me your struggle, but only if it makes me feel inspired, not uncomfortable. That's not acceptance. That's conditional tolerance. And leaders can't build from that. So you begin to detach, not out of pride or ego, but out of necessity, because there are things you carry now that no one else understands. Decisions that would crush someone if they knew the full weight of them. Fears you can't name because to name them would shake the confidence of everyone watching. The further you move into your purpose, the more your silence becomes your shield. Not because you're trying to hide, but because explaining yourself is now a liability. And power, real power, thrives in controlled expression, not emotional transparency. This isn't to say emotion has no place. Quite the opposite. Emotion, when mastered, becomes vision. It becomes conviction. But when unleashed without restraint, it creates chaos. Imagine a storm with no structure, just noise, wind, destruction. That's what uncontained emotion looks like in power. It doesn't comfort, it confuses. And confusion is the first crack in your foundation. Becoming who you truly are often requires walking through silence alone. It requires letting go of the need to be constantly understood even by those closest to you. Because when you are tasked with carrying vision, clarity must come before closeness. And sometimes the very people you long to connect with are not capable of holding the full depth of your truth without misinterpreting it. You begin to see relationships differently, not with suspicion, but with precision. You stop spilling everything to feel less alone. You learn that connection is sacred, not casual, that some emotions are meant to be transmuted internally, not shared publicly. And the fewer people who have access to your internal world, the more protected your purpose becomes. Not everyone should know what keeps you up at night. Not everyone should be invited into the furnace where your strength is forged. This doesn't make you cold. It makes you clear. There is a difference. Coldness is indifference. Clarity is responsibility. And when you operate from clarity, you begin to notice how often people equate closeness with entitlement. They want access, but not accountability. They want presence, but not pressure. And the moment you withhold something, your time, your thoughts, your feelings, they claim you've changed, that you've become distant. But in truth, you've just become aware. That awareness reshapes how you communicate. You speak less, but with more weight. You listen more, but absorb less. You offer guidance, but rarely seek validation because validation, when it becomes a need, becomes your leash. And the powerful cannot afford to be leashed, not by praise, not by criticism, and especially not by emotional dependency. You will still feel deeply. You'll still wrestle with doubt. You'll still crave intimacy, but you'll start choosing solitude over superficial closeness. Not because you want to suffer alone, but because you understand that most people aren't asking to help carry your burden. They're asking to be entertained by it. That sounds harsh, but it's true. When you lead, people become curious. They want to peek behind the curtain. They want to know the story, the struggle, the raw truth. But very few are prepared to sit with that truth without distorting it to fit their own narrative. And so you stop offering it freely. You start protecting your peace like it's oxygen, because it is. Without peace, your decisions become reactive. Your leadership becomes emotional. Your focus dissolves. And in that blur, you become predictable. Predictability, when you are in a position of influence, is dangerous. It gives people a map to your mind, and those maps don't always end up in safe hands. You learn to be present without being porous, to show up without showing all, to speak with warmth but not with weakness. This is not performance. It's preservation. Preservation of purpose. Preservation of clarity. Preservation of the self you've worked so hard to understand and build. You begin to see that connection doesn't have to mean exposure. It can be built through presence, consistency, depth, not constant emotional display. You don't close yourself off entirely. You become selective, intentional. You choose to connect through purpose, not just through pain. You connect through shared values, not shared wounds. And in doing so, the connections you do build become stronger, not louder, stronger. Because they're not built on dependency, they're built on respect. Seneca wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." And this applies not just to possessions, but to relationships. Craving constant closeness, constant reassurance, constant understanding. That's emotional poverty. Real strength is in the one who can sit in the unknown, in the misunderstood, and still remain steady. That steadiness doesn't mean you're unaffected. It means you're in control of how you express what you feel. The more influence you hold, the more important that control becomes. Because people don't just watch what you say, they study how you carry yourself. Every word is measured. Every reaction is interpreted. And in that spotlight, emotion isn't just a feeling. It's a signal, one you must learn to send with, care or not at all. So yes, connection requires vulnerability. But power demands a form of detachment. Not detachment from humanity, but from the impulse to be emotionally accessible to everyone all the time. It's learning when to speak and when to hold back, when to share and when to remain silent, when to connect and when to protect. And as you walk this path, it gets quieter. The circle gets smaller, the conversations get. 4. Boundaries are not walls. Understanding the difference. Deeper, and the responsibility gets heavier. But within that stillness, something profound happens. You stop reaching outward for safety. You start building it inward, and the more you do that, the less you need from the world around you. That's the paradox no one tells you. The more you detach from needing connection, the more intentional your connections become. The less you rely on being seen, the more you see clearly. And the less you give your emotions away freely, the more power they carry when you choose to speak. That's not coldness. That's maturity. That's clarity. That's the kind of power that doesn't shout. It simply stands. Still, focused, untouchable. There's this image we carry when we hear the word fortress, stone walls, gates that never open, high towers and a moat between us and the world. But that's just architecture. The real fortress isn't made of stone or steel. It's made of intention, of boundaries no one sees, but everyone feels. It's not a place you retreat to. It's something you carry with you, a state of mind that can't be breached by gossip, by judgment, or by the shifting winds of someone else's opinion. The strongest fortress is one that doesn't isolate you from life. It roots you so deeply in your own self that nothing outside of you holds the power to knock you off balance. And here's the truth most people miss. It's not about shutting people out. It's about not letting anything in that doesn't align with your values, your peace, your focus. The fortress isn't there to keep the world away. It's there to keep you whole in a world that pulls you in 100 different directions, where expectations, comparisons, and distractions shout for your attention. Building this inner fortress is not a luxury. It's survival. If you don't stand guard over your mind, someone else will take control of it. And they won't do it with force. They'll do it with flattery, with guilt, with manipulation, dressed as concern. That's how breaches happen, not with an attack, but with an invitation. And once the wrong person steps into your inner world, it doesn't take long before confusion follows. You start questioning your instincts. You hesitate when you used to move with clarity. You seek permission where you once stood firm. That's the danger of a weak foundation. It doesn't break all at once. It crumbles slowly, quietly, until one day you look around and realize you're no longer living from your values, but reacting to someone else's noise. The fortress mindset changes that. You stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop defending your peace to those who benefit from your chaos. And most importantly, you stop letting your mood be dictated by external validation or criticism. You become sovereign, grounded, still. That's the paradox of strength. It looks like silence from the outside, but on the inside, it's a roaring fire that says, I know who I am, and I don't need you to agree with it. This isn't coldness, it's clarity. And clarity, once cultivated, becomes a shield, a soft, immovable boundary that doesn't need to push or pull. It simply is. Some will call it distance. Others might say you've changed. Let them. Because the moment your stability becomes uncomfortable for others, you've just revealed who was invested in your confusion. Carl Jung once said, the foundation of all mental illness is the unwillingness to experience legitimate suffering. That's what happens when you build no fortress. You suffer every time someone disapproves, every time you feel misunderstood, every time someone doesn't see your worth. But when you build this fortress, you accept a new kind of suffering, the kind that comes from restraint, from choosing to stay quiet when you could lash out, from letting people misinterpret you rather than wasting your energy trying to be understood. And over time, that suffering transforms into strength. You learn to observe instead of react, to sit in discomfort without rushing to fix it, to recognize that most situations don't need your energy, they need your stillness. That's the power of a fortified mind. It doesn't resist the world, it outlasts it, like a mountain that doesn't tremble at every storm. It doesn't mean you're unfeeling. It means your emotions aren't running the show. It means you've built something steadier beneath the surface. Something that no rumor, no betrayal, no fleeting praise can touch. This inner stillness becomes the way you navigate everything. Conflict doesn't feel like chaos. It becomes information. Criticism doesn't sting. It becomes insight or noise. And you learn to tell the difference. Praise doesn't. It simply passes through. And betrayal no longer breaks you because you're not living in a way that relies on others to hold you together. That's what makes you untouchable. Not because nothing happens to you, but because nothing outside of you decides who you are. But don't mistake this for isolation. This kind of strength invites connection, but only the kind that respects your boundaries. It allows for love, but not at the cost of self-abandonment. It opens the door, but it does not remove the threshold. People can walk with you, but not through you. And the ones who understand that they'll stay. The rest will leave, and you'll learn not to chase. Because peace doesn't come from the presence of people. It comes from the absence of noise. And noise comes in many forms. Gossip, doubt, pressure to perform, pressure to explain, pressure to shrink. That's why this mindset matters. It doesn't just protect your peace, it preserves your purpose. And purpose without boundaries dissolves into performance. You forget why you started. You start making decisions from fear, from fatigue, from the need to prove something. That's what happens when the fortress is weak. You become reactive, but when the walls are strong, you become strategic, intentional, rooted. Epictetus said, "No person is free who is not master of themselves." That mastery begins in the mind, in the discipline to hold your ground when the world pushes, in the wisdom to say no, not with anger, but with certainty, in the courage to walk away from anything that tempts you to betray your own integrity. That is the essence of the fortress. It doesn't control others. It controls your response to them. And in that control, there is freedom. A mind like that doesn't need applause. It doesn't need reassurance. It doesn't even need to be understood. It just needs to be aligned with truth, with purpose, with something deeper than the moment. And once you build that alignment, you'll start to see things for what they are, not what you hoped they would be. That clarity may cost you relationships, opportunities, comfort, but it will give you something far more valuable: consistency, direction, inner power. And as that power grows, you begin to move differently. Not faster, not louder, just with more precision. You no longer feel the need to explain yourself to everyone. You choose where your energy goes. You become less accessible to drama and more available to purpose. You let go of the need to be liked and embrace the freedom to be real. And with every boundary held, your mind becomes quieter, your heart becomes lighter, your path becomes clearer. That's the fortress. It's not a wall that keeps the world out. It's a foundation that keeps your strength in. It doesn't make you hard. It makes you whole. It doesn't make you distant. It makes you discerning. And when the storms come, as they always do, you don't fall apart. You don't break. You remain still, clear, untouched. Not because nothing tried to shake you, but because you finally built something that nothing could move. Betrayal doesn't begin with a knife. It begins with trust, with comfort, with the soft moments where your guard is down and you believe just for a second that someone sees you and would never harm you. That illusion is the real danger, because betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It doesn't shout from a distance. It whispers from the seat beside you, from the friend you called family, from the colleague you mentored, from the one who knew the way in, not by force, but by invitation. And once you've been betrayed, not once, but several times, you start to realize something that cuts deeper than any act itself. Betrayal is a pattern, not a surprise. It's not always malicious. Sometimes it's born of weakness, of jealousy, of desperation, but the outcome is always the same. You're left holding the broken pieces of something you thought was solid. And the instinct is to ask why, to replay every conversation, to blame yourself for not seeing it coming. But the truth is, the clues were always there. Subtle, overlooked, dismissed in the name of friendship. That's how betrayal always works. It hides behind familiarity. It blends in with loyalty until the moment it doesn't. And by the time you realize it, it's already done its damage. You learn quickly that closeness isn't the same as alignment. That just because someone walks with you doesn't mean they're walking for the same reasons. Some walk beside you because they believe in where you're going. Others walk beside you to see how far they can follow before they push you off the path and take your place. And it's painful, not just because of the loss, but because of the clarity it forces on you. You begin to see the small ways you ignored your instincts, the tiny moments you brushed off their envy, the times you thought they'd never do that to me only to find out they already were. And here's where most people go wrong. They become cynical. They shut everyone out. They let betrayal harden them into suspicion. But the wiser path isn't isolation. It's discernment. It's learning to observe without always reacting, to listen between the lines, to trust not blindly, but with awareness. Because you don't need to expect betrayal from everyone. You just need to stop being surprised when it comes from someone you once let close. The Stoics never told us to expect perfection. They told us to expect human nature. And human nature left unchecked will always serve itself first. Seneca once said, "The man who has anticipated the coming of troubles takes away their power when they arrive." And that's what this awareness gives you. Not bitterness, but strength. Not fear, but foresight. You stop handing out keys to your heart just because someone smiles. 5. The sharpening of vision. What happens when the circle tightens? You stop sharing your deepest plans with people who haven't proven they know how to hold your silence with respect. You stop offering loyalty in advance and start letting time reveal who's really for you. What you start to notice is that betrayal always has a rhythm. It follows the same sequence: intimacy, comfort, subtle shifts, then the break. And if you pay attention, you'll catch the signs before the break happens. A certain look when you succeed, a subtle distance when you need support, a shift in language. Less we, more me. It's not paranoia, it's pattern recognition. And the longer you live with clarity, the easier it is to see. But what makes betrayal so destructive isn't just the act, it's what it does to your belief in connection. It makes you question the good ones. It makes you hold back with people who've done nothing wrong. And if you're not careful, it poisons your view of loyalty altogether. That's why the fortress of the mind matters. That's why the filters you build aren't cold. They're necessary, not because everyone is out to get you, but because not everyone is meant to go where you're going. And some people, even those you love, will try to sabotage you just to keep you close because your growth makes their stagnation unbearable. There's a quiet violence in betrayal that doesn't come from anger. It comes from comfort. The person who betrays you doesn't do it with malice in their eyes. They do it with the belief that you'll recover, that you'll understand, that they had no choice. They justify it. They reframe the story in their favor, and that's what makes it sting. The absence of accountability. The betrayal is compounded by the fact that they believe they're still the victim. But you don't have to carry that weight. You don't have to seek justice from the person who fractured your trust. You don't have to win the argument or even confront them. You just have to decide. This chapter ends here. No more energy. No more access. No more wondering if it could have been different because it wasn't. And the only way forward is forward without them. Carl Jung once observed that shame is a soul-leaning emotion, and betrayal often carries shame not just for what they did, but for what you didn't see. You blame yourself. You feel foolish, exposed. But shame is only powerful when it goes unexamined. The moment you step back and see betrayal for what it is, not a sign of your weakness, but a lesson in clarity, you begin to take back your strength. You don't become harder. You become wiser, sharper, more tuned into the silent language people speak when they think you're not watching. Eventually, you'll be grateful, not for the pain, but for the precision it gave you, for the way it taught you to protect your peace without apology, for how it carved a line between those who say they're loyal and those who show it. You'll see that every betrayal was a kind of brutal grace, stripping away the illusions you clung to, exposing the cracks in your foundation, and giving you the chance to rebuild, not with bitterness, but with discernment. And that discernment becomes your strength. You stop explaining your choices. You stop oversharing your dreams. You let people earn the right to stand beside you, not through words, but through consistency, through presence, through how they act when you're not useful to them. That's how you know. Not when things are good, not when the path is easy, but when silence falls, when your back is turned, when your light threatens to outshine theirs. So you become intentional. You keep your circle small, not because you're afraid, but because you've seen what happens when it's too wide. You speak less, not because you lack trust, but because you've learned the value of holding some truths for yourself. You expect less, not because you're jaded, but because you're done giving more than people are willing to give back. And through it all, you hold your center. You don't let betrayal define you. You let it refine you into someone who walks with a quiet strength, who loves with boundaries, who leads with clarity, and who never forgets. The people who are closest to you will always carry the greatest power to hurt you, which is why your greatest power must be knowing exactly who and what is worth the risk. Trust feels simple when you're young. You give it without hesitation, assuming that if your intentions are good, theirs must be too. You share, you open up, you believe. And for a while, that innocence feels like strength. It creates bonds. It builds warmth. It makes the world feel safe. But safety built on assumption is fragile. Eventually, life teaches you that trust is not a gift you hand out freely. It's a currency, one of the rarest. And every time it's spent in the wrong place, it costs you more than you thought it would. That's the lesson most people learn too late. That trust, once given freely, becomes a calculated risk. The higher you climb in life, emotionally, professionally, spiritually, the more that risk increases because now your decisions carry weight. Your words echo further. Your vulnerabilities, once harmless now, become tools in someone else's hands if they choose to misuse them. And while it doesn't mean you stop trusting, it means you start choosing carefully, not with fear, but with awareness, not from paranoia, but from pattern recognition. You begin to understand that trust isn't something you owe anyone. It's something they earn slowly, consistently, and not just once, but over time through action. There's a kind of grief in that realization because it means letting go of the idea that you can fully relax in every room, that you can be fully seen by every person who claims to care. It means that even the people closest to you have limits, and that proximity doesn't equal loyalty. That truth stings. at first, but it also sharpens you. You stop mistaking charisma for character. You stop equating shared history with shared intention. And most importantly, you stop confusing kindness with alignment. To be powerful is to be deliberate, not defensive, not closed off, just intentional. You understand that trust isn't just about what someone says. It's about what they do when it's inconvenient for them, when no one is watching, when they have nothing to gain. That's the test most people fail, not because they're evil, but because they haven't done the work to hold someone else's trust with care. And trust, when placed in unsteady hands, doesn't just break, it backfires. This is why the wise grow quieter, why they speak less, share less, move more in silence, not because they've lost faith in people, but because they've found peace in being selective. They've learned that some people want your trust, not to honor it, but to access you, to use it as leverage, as proof of closeness they haven't really earned. And when you've been burned enough times, you stop letting words convince you. You start looking for consistency, and not just in how someone treats you, but in how they treat people who can do nothing for them. Aristotle once said, "We are what we repeatedly do." And in the realm of trust, that means you pay attention not to grand gestures, but to repeated behavior, to how someone shows up when you're silent, to how they speak about others behind closed doors, to whether they protect what you share when you're not in the room. Trust then becomes less about the stories people tell and more about the patterns they reveal. This shift changes your relationships. It doesn't make them colder, it makes them clearer. You no longer feel the need to be fully understood by everyone. You stop offering your inner world like a gift to anyone who asks. You start holding it with reverence because you realize that the more sacred something is, the fewer hands it belongs in. And your thoughts, your doubts, your dreams, those are sacred. Not because they're perfect, but because they're yours. There's a kind of strength that comes from keeping certain things for yourself, not out of secrecy, but out of self-respect. You realize that not every insight needs to be spoken, not every plan needs to be shared, and not every feeling needs to be validated. The powerful don't hide. They refine. They withhold not out of fear, but out of discipline. They know that once trust leaves your hands, it belongs to someone else. And not everyone is worthy of that responsibility. But this doesn't mean you become cynical. It means you become calibrated. You still love, but you love wisely. You still connect, but with boundaries. You still open up, but only to those who have shown that they know how to carry what you hand them. And even then, you watch, not with suspicion, but with awareness, because trust, when given too quickly, turns into a liability. But when given with discernment, it becomes a bridge that strengthens both sides. Carl Jung believed that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. And transformation requires integrity. It requires presence. It requires the willingness to hold another person's truth without twisting it, leaking it, or using it as a mirror for your own insecurities. Most people aren't ready for that kind of responsibility, and that's okay. But once you see that clearly, you stop expecting it. And in that release, you reclaim your power. You begin to notice the spaces where your trust has been stretched too thin. where you've overexplained yourself, overexposed yourself, where you've given people access to places within you that they hadn't earned. And slowly you begin to seal those doors, not with anger, but with grace, because you're not punishing anyone. You're protecting what matters, your focus, your peace, your vision. And what's beautiful is that the more selective you become, the more honest your life becomes. The relationships that remain are stronger. The conversations are deeper. The silences richer. You don't need to perform. You don't need to convince. You just exist, fully without defense, because you've learned to trust yourself first. And that's the trust that matters most. Once you hold that, everything else becomes easier to navigate. The world doesn't need more open books. It needs more wise. 6. The necessity of strategic withdrawal, protecting your mission. Authors. People who know which pages to share and which ones to keep close. People who understand that trust is not a transaction. It's a bond. And bonds, when formed without care, become chains. But when formed with intention, they become anchors. So yes, trust is a risk always. But now it's a risk you measure. A gift you protect, a language you speak with precision, not impulse. And in that precision, you find something the reckless never will. Peace. Peace in knowing that what's shared is respected, what's held is safe, and what's built is solid. You don't have to be suspicious of everyone. Just awake, just grounded. Enough to see clearly, to trust wisely, and to never again hand over your power. Are disguised as vulnerability to someone who hasn't proven they know what to do with it. That's not caution, that's wisdom. And wisdom is the currency of the truly powerful. Clarity isn't something you stumble into. It's something you make room for. And more often than not, that room begins with distance, not emotional detachment in the cold, indifferent sense, but distance in the way a painter steps back to see the whole canvas. You can't understand a situation while you're still wrapped in its emotion. You can't make sharp decisions when your vision is fogged by closeness, comfort, or urgency. That's why the ones who lead well, think well, and live well are often misunderstood as distant. But distance isn't rejection, it's reflection. There's a quiet kind of power in learning how to step back, to not jump at every emotion, to not react to every tone in someone's voice or every shift in someone's behavior. When you're close to everything, too close, you become reactive. You start seeing threats where there are none. You start projecting fears instead of identifying facts. And that's how chaos enters. Not because the world got louder, but because your inner world stopped filtering the noise. The Stoics knew this. They didn't talk about control as domination. They spoke of it as inner command. Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free." But bravery isn't charging in. Bravery is knowing when to hold back. Holding back is harder than acting. It requires more strength to pause than to speak, more clarity to observe than to intervene. But this is the foundation of real power, not performance, but precision. When you operate from clarity, you don't need to control others. You control the one thing that truly matters, yourself. And when you can do that, your environment stops becoming a battlefield and becomes a space for strategic movement. You start to respond instead of react. You move with timing instead of impulse. you see patterns instead of just people. That shift changes everything. Suddenly, you're no longer sucked into every conflict, every invitation to drama, every emotional wave. You recognize that peace isn't found by avoiding problems, but by standing still within them. Distance gives you that stillness. It's the space between emotion and action where your real power grows. Because once you've paused, once you've breathed, once you've removed yourself from the immediate pressure, you can actually see not just what's happening, but why it's happening, and more importantly, how to move through it without losing yourself. Clarity isn't always comfortable. It will ask you to acknowledge things you'd rather avoid. It will reveal truths about people you care about, decisions you've made, and patterns you've repeated. But without that clarity, you're just surviving. And survival without insight becomes a loop, a cycle of reaction, regret, reset. Distance breaks that cycle. It slows you down just enough to notice the choice before the mistake. That's the kind of control most people never reach. Because most people are still trying to control the world instead of their perception of it. If your inner voice is always drowned out by the expectations, judgments, and demands of others, you're not really living your life. You're performing someone else's version of it. And performance is exhausting. It's not sustainable. It's also not strategic. Clarity allows you to choose where your energy goes. You no longer feel the need to attend every argument you're invited to. You don't jump to fix every problem, explain every decision, or justify every change. You begin to understand that most noise is not an emergency. It's just distraction. And when you live in distraction long enough, confusion becomes your default. You start doubting what you already know. You start second-guessing your intuition. You start asking questions you've already answered just because someone else doesn't like your answer. Distance is how you take that power back, not by withdrawing from the world entirely, but by withdrawing your urgency to be understood by it. You're not here to be available to everyone's emotions. You're not here to carry the weight of every room you walk into. You're here to move with clarity, to see what's yours to carry and what isn't, to discern when to speak and when silence is the wiser choice. As you step into this way of living, something subtle shifts in how you experience conflict. You stop seeing it as something to fix and start seeing it as information. Not everything needs resolution. Some things just need space. Some people just need time, and some problems aren't yours to solve. That kind of clarity protects your energy. It protects your time. It keeps you aligned with your direction, not distracted by detours that don't lead anywhere worth going. This is the difference between movement and momentum. Anyone can be busy. Anyone can make noise. But those who move with purpose, who act with intention, who build with vision, they do so from a place of inner stillness. And stillness can only be accessed when you step away from the pull of emotional chaos, when you give yourself enough distance to remember what matters and what's just noise. The more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. You'll find yourself responding slower, but with more weight. You'll feel the urge to speak and choose silence. Instead, you'll notice patterns in others you used to miss. You'll see opportunities before they arrive and threats before they're fully formed. Because distance gives you foresight, And foresight isn't magic. It's just the reward of patience. You won't always get it right. Sometimes you'll still act on emotion, still get pulled into the storm, still say something you regret or move too fast. But even then, the distance you've trained yourself to hold will shorten the damage. You'll recover faster. You'll return to center with less friction because the mind that's practiced in clarity doesn't stay lost for long. And as this clarity deepens, you'll notice another change. You stop explaining yourself. You stop needing to. You understand that clarity doesn't need validation. It doesn't beg to be understood. It simply stands unshaken. And in that stillness, you become a mirror. The people around you will feel it. Some will be drawn to it. Others will be unnerved by it. But either way, they will respect it. Because the world respects what it cannot shake. That's the power of distance. It's not isolation. It's alignment. It's not detachment. It's discernment. It's the space where you remember who you are, without the world constantly trying to tell you who you should be. It's where you refine your focus, strengthen your boundaries, and reclaim your voice. In that space, control becomes simple, not because you dominate everything around you, but because you've mastered the only thing you ever needed to, yourself. And from that mastery, clarity flows quietly, relentlessly, without force, without noise, just presence, just power, just peace. Most people see leadership as a performance, a role you step into once others decide you're ready, a set of traits, charisma, confidence, command that suddenly appear the moment the spotlight hits. But real leadership doesn't begin when the world starts listening. It begins long before that in the silence, in the moments when no one's watching, when there's no applause, no confirmation, no one telling you you're on the right path. That's when the mask of leadership is forged, not as a deception, but as a layer of resilience, not something to hide behind, but something that holds you together. When everything around you is uncertain, you don't just wake up one day and lead. You build yourself into someone who can hold that weight. And that building happens privately in doubt, in frustration, in decisions you have to make without consensus or validation. The first person you have to convince is yourself, not with words, but with action, with consistency, with your ability to keep going when everything inside you wants to give up. Leadership is tested most in the absence of recognition, when there's no one to tell you that you're doing well, and yet you move forward anyway. What many don't realize is that strength in leadership is rarely loud. It doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need to dominate a room. Often it just stands still, not because it doesn't feel the pressure, but because it's learned not to be ruled by it. The people who lead with quiet strength have already fought their biggest battles, not in public, but in private. They've wrestled with doubt in empty rooms. They've sat with failure when no one else knew they were breaking. And through that process, they built something unshakable inside, something that doesn't flinch when the world turns cold. You begin to understand that leadership is less about being followed and more about being rooted, about knowing who you are when everything familiar is gone, when those who once supported you change direction, when the outcome is unclear and the pressure mounts. That's when the inner voice has to be louder than the noise, not louder in volume, but louder in conviction. the kind of conviction that isn't dependent on results or praise, the kind that lives in the actions you take when doubt is screaming in your ear. Carl Jung once said, "The world." 7. Self-reliance as foundation, building on bedrock, will ask you who you are, and if you don't know, it will tell you. That is the essence of private leadership, knowing yourself before the world tries to define you, building your foundation so strong that you don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You don't need to prove your worth. You just embody it. And that embodiment comes through 1,000 quiet choices. The choice to get up when it's easier to stay down. The choice to act with integrity when compromise would be more convenient. The choice to remain steady when everything inside you feels unstable. When you lead from that place, you stop needing to be the loudest in the room. You stop needing to explain your every move. You realize that power isn't in the display. It's in the discipline. And discipline doesn't grow in public. It grows in silence, in solitude, in the boring, relentless repetition of doing the right thing without anyone noticing. Most people won't see it. They'll only see the outcome, the title, the speech, the presence. But those are just the surface. The real weight is carried in private long before the world decides to listen. It's in those private moments that the mask becomes necessary, not as a lie, but as a structure, a way of keeping yourself focused when the emotions rise, a tool to keep your doubt from leaking into your decisions. It's not about hiding who you are. It's about protecting what you've built from being shaken by every breeze. Because the truth is, even when you're strong, you're not immune to fear. You're not exempt from insecurity. You just don't let it dictate your next move. That's what the mask helps you do. Hold your ground long enough for clarity to return. And with time, that mask becomes less about hiding and more about honoring your responsibility. You're not just leading for yourself anymore. People look to you in crisis. They borrow your calm when they have none. They watch how you move, how you speak, how you carry pressure. And what they need most isn't perfection. They need steadiness, a sense that even if everything else is crumbling, you won't. Not because you have all the answers, but because you know how to move through chaos without becoming it. This is why the strongest leaders are often misunderstood. Their silence is mistaken for aloofness. Their restraint is seen as indifference. But those who've worn the mask long enough understand that real power isn't about reaction. It's about regulation. They don't rise and fall with every win or loss. They move with rhythm, not reactivity. And that rhythm was practiced long before anyone saw it. Even now, if you're building something, if you're trying to lead your own life with purpose, the hardest part will always be believing in yourself. When there's no echo to reinforce your direction, when you're doubted, when your efforts are unseen, that's where you shape the version of you the world will later admire. Not on stage, not in spotlight, but in the dark, in the discipline, in the unwavering choice to keep going when no one claps. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself often that praise and criticism are both meaningless noise. That what matters most is living in accordance with your values, regardless of what others say. That principle anchors real leadership. Not popularity, not visibility, but alignment. The kind of alignment that lets you move through fire and remain composed. That allows you to lose people, without losing yourself, that gives you the strength to carry others without collapsing. Eventually, the world may catch up. They may begin to see the strength you've been cultivating all along. They may recognize your resilience, your wisdom, your grace under pressure, but whether they do or not is secondary, because the purpose of leadership isn't to be seen. It's to serve, to carry weight most people don't want, to make decisions that cost you comfort, and to do it all without needing recognition in return. So when you stand alone, when the path feels quiet and the burden feels heavy, remember this. You're not weak for wearing the mask. You're not inauthentic for protecting your peace. You're not fake for showing restraint when everything inside you feels like breaking. You're just leading quietly, steadily from a place the world rarely sees, but always feels. And if you've built yourself in the dark with discipline, with intention, with clarity, then no matter how loud the world becomes, you'll never be moved by it. Because the strongest leaders never began with applause. They began with silence, with doubt, with solitude. And through it all, they became something few ever dare to be: unshakable. Solitude isn't about escaping the world. It's about returning to yourself. In a time where distractions are endless, being alone with your own thoughts is often viewed as uncomfortable, even dangerous. But the truth is, the discomfort we feel in solitude isn't because we're alone. It's because we're finally facing what's inside. The noise we try to drown out with conversations, entertainment, and obligations. That noise is often coming from within. And in solitude, there's no one left to blame, no one to validate, no one to perform for. It's just you and what you've avoided. That's why so many run from it. But the powerful, they walk toward it. To be fully present with yourself is one of the rarest forms of courage, because there's no mask to wear. When no one is watching, there's no role to play. What's left is the raw material, the insecurities, the fears, the doubts, and the responsibility to sort through them. This is where refinement begins. This is where clarity is born. When you give yourself permission to sit in stillness, to ask uncomfortable questions without flinching, you start to realize that solitude isn't a punishment. It's a tool, a mirror, and often the only place where truth has room to rise. The world rewards those who are loud, busy, and constantly seen. But wisdom grows in the unseen moments. The real decisions, the ones that change your life, are rarely made in crowded rooms. They're made in quiet reflection. That's the paradox. The people who seem to move the world are often the ones who spend the most time away from it alone. Not because they hate people, but because they know power comes from understanding their own mind before being influenced by others. There's a kind of strength that only silence can build. When you stop needing the presence of others to feel valuable, everything changes. It's not that relationships or connections become meaningless. They become clearer. You stop chasing people who were never meant to stay. You stop bending to please crowds that don't care. And instead, you begin to attract those who recognize the stillness in you. People are drawn to those who don't need them to feel whole. That's what makes solitude magnetic. It reveals the difference between attachment and connection. The most powerful decisions are often made in solitude. The quiet choice to walk away. The difficult decision to let go, the moment of clarity that changes the entire direction of your life. These things rarely happen in chaos. They require space and the ability to hear your own voice without it being drowned by the opinions of the world. When you learn to retreat into yourself, not as an escape, but as a practice, you begin to uncover a version of you that doesn't rely on approval, a version that knows, that listens, that leads. An awakening doesn't come from being surrounded. It comes from being still, from noticing your thoughts without judgment, from facing what's been buried beneath your constant motion, from accepting that growth often begins where comfort ends. Solitude is the place where you meet your future self, not the version shaped by noise, but the one forged in silence. People often confuse being alone with being lonely, but they're not the same. Loneliness is the ache for something outside of you. Solitude is the comfort in knowing you have everything you need within. When you start to feel at home in your own mind, external validation loses its grip. You don't chase attention because you're already seen by the one who matters most, you. You don't beg for love because you've given it to yourself first. And from that fullness, everything else becomes a choice, not a need. You begin to notice how the quiet reorganizes your thoughts, how it reveals what actually matters. You see the patterns that used to control you, the stories you've told yourself, the roles you've played, and slowly you start to rewrite them. In solitude, you don't just think, you evolve. You step away from who the world told you to be and return to who you were before it all got noisy. You shed layers that never belonged to you, and what remains is honest, clear, powerful. The ability to be alone and still feel whole is a superpower. In a world obsessed with connection, the person who is content in their own company holds the upper hand. They aren't moved by gossip. They don't shrink under pressure. They respond rather than react. They carry a calmness that can't be faked because it was built in the dark, sharpened in the silence, and proven in the moments when no one was watching. You'll find that solitude doesn't make you harder. It makes you wiser. You become more intentional with your words, more aware of your energy, more protective of your peace. You stop offering explanations to people who were never listening. You stop proving yourself to those who doubted you. And instead, you live quietly, deliberately, authentically. Because once you've tasted the clarity of solitude, the noise of the world becomes optional. Marcus Aurelius said it best. Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. That retreat is always there, waiting, not for the perfect moment, not for permission, but for you to choose it, to step away from the endless noise and return to the source yourself. Because no matter where life takes you, your most powerful ally will always be the part of you that can sit in silence and still stand tall. So the next time the world feels overwhelming, don't run toward more noise. Don't fill your time with what's easy. Step back, be still. Listen not to the world, but to the quiet voice inside you that knows who you are. That voice may be soft, but it's never wrong. It's the compass in the chaos, the foundation under pressure, the strength that no one sees, but everyone eventually feels. You don't need a crowd to be complete. You need clarity. and clarity often comes wrapped. 8. The cost of real power. What you must be willing to release. In silence, in solitude, in the moments that look like nothing on the outside, but shift everything within. That's where the powerful are made. Not on stages, not in rooms filled with praise, but in the quiet where they remember who they are without the world telling them who they should be. There's a strange pressure in today's world to always be saying something to explain, to react, to defend, to clarify, as if every pause in conversation is a missed opportunity, or every unspoken thought is a weakness. But silence isn't weakness. It isn't the absence of thought. In fact, it's often the presence of deeper thought. The more powerful someone becomes, the more they learn this truth. Not everything requires a response. Not every rumor deserves your breath. And not every opinion needs your correction. Silence, in its truest form, is not avoidance, it's strategy. People fear what they can't read. And nothing is harder to read than someone who doesn't react. Someone who doesn't rush to prove their side, doesn't scramble to fix perceptions, doesn't panic when misunderstood. In silence, there is control. Control over your energy, control over your image, control over the battlefield itself. Because when you're silent, the other side starts guessing. And in their guessing, they reveal more about themselves than you ever could by speaking. That's the brilliance of stillness. It's not passive, it's surgical. But silence takes discipline. It's tempting to explain yourself, to want to be seen and understood, to correct every wrong impression. But power doesn't need to be understood. It needs to be unshaken. The moment you start chasing clarity from others, you give them control over your state. Silence breaks that cycle. It places the burden of interpretation on them while you stay centered in your own calm. And that calm, that's your fortress. Because the louder the world becomes, the more rare and valuable your silence becomes. We live in a time where everyone has a microphone, everyone has a platform, but few have the strength to say nothing when it matters most, to let actions speak, to let presence carry weight. It's easy to shout. It's easy to react. It's easy to flood the space with noise. But the one who remains quiet when others are loud, who observes while others scramble to be seen, that's the one people start watching more closely. Not because they're hidden, but because they're unreadable. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." And that's what silence often demands. Acceptance, the kind that says, "I don't need your version of me to be whole." You begin to understand that silence is not the void. It's the container, the space where you decide what enters and what doesn't, what matters and what doesn't, who you engage, and who you leave unanswered. That's not arrogance. It's focus. Silence also gives you time. Time to think clearly, to separate emotion from principle, to decide if speaking would actually serve you or just satisfy your ego. And in that space, you gain leverage. You see the long game while others are stuck in short-term reaction. You play chess while they play checkers. That's not manipulation. It's maturity. The maturity to understand that not every fire needs to be fought. Some burn out on their own, and the ones that don't, you handle them with clarity, not panic. It's in the silence that your reputation is shaped, not by you, but by how others speak about you. When you don't defend yourself and that reflection, that mirror of the room tells you more about them than about you. Because if someone changes their opinion of you simply because you didn't speak, they were never holding your truth. They were holding their need for control. And when you stop giving that to them, they feel discomfort. But that discomfort isn't your responsibility. When you lead with silence, people begin to respect the way you move. Not because you intimidate them, but because you create space for mystery. And mystery, when anchored in integrity, becomes presence. People lean in. They pay closer attention. And eventually, they learn to listen more and speak less just by being around you. That's leadership. Quiet, composed, intentional. This doesn't mean you never speak. It means you choose when and more importantly, why. Speaking from clarity is different than speaking from pressure. One is rooted in truth. The other is driven by fear. And you can feel the difference. So can everyone else. There's a weight in words that are used sparingly. They land differently. They echo because silence prepared the space for them to be heard. Marcus Aurelius believed that we should waste no time arguing what a good man should be. We should just be one. And that's the deeper principle behind strategic silence. It's not about withholding truth. It's about embodying it so fully that it no longer requires explanation. You become the proof. Your life becomes the answer. Your peace becomes the message. As this mindset takes root, you begin to navigate the world differently. You stop jumping to defend every misunderstanding. You stop needing to correct every critic. You stop reacting to things that used to drain you. And in that restraint, you find energy returning. You find time stretching. You find your thoughts gaining clarity. Because silence isn't empty. It's where everything important begins to form. Even your relationships change. People begin to approach you with more intention. They choose their words more carefully, not out of fear, but out of respect because they've seen that you don't fill space just to be heard. You wait, you watch, you respond with meaning. And when you do speak, it's worth listening to. This is the kind of presence that doesn't need volume. It doesn't need grand gestures. It just is. And people feel it before they understand it. That's why silence is so powerful. It transcends explanation. It moves through rooms not with noise, but with energy. And the ones who master that energy, they don't just lead. They shape perception. They guide emotion. They hold space in a way few ever learn to. But make no mistake, this isn't about detachment from the world. It's about deep connection to yourself, to your values, to your inner compass. So that when the noise rises, you don't rise with it. You remain still, grounded, focused, and from that stillness, every move you make becomes intentional, every word meaningful, every silence deliberate. So no, silence isn't emptiness. It's the most strategic form of presence. It's the pause that gives your mind room to think. It's the boundary that protects your energy. It's the posture that teaches others how to approach you. And the longer you live this way, the more you'll see. Power isn't in how loudly you speak. It's in how deeply your silence is felt. Most people want to be liked. It's natural. It feels good to be accepted, to be praised, to be seen as agreeable. We grow up conditioned to seek approval from parents, teachers, peers, And in many ways, that approval becomes our compass. If people clap, we're on the right track. If they frown, we retreat. But leadership doesn't work like that. Leadership begins where popularity ends. Because at some point, to lead is to decide. And decisions, real ones, the ones that carry weight, don't come with universal applause. They come with risk, with backlash, with silence. It's easy to be liked when you're saying what people want to hear, when you're reflecting their expectations back to them, when you're smiling, nodding, agreeing. That's performance, not leadership. But step outside of that. Comfort. Say what's needed instead of what's wanted. Draw a boundary. Hold a standard. Make a hard call that benefits the mission but upsets the moment. That's when the true test begins. Not when people love you, but when they don't, and you keep going anyway. Because leadership isn't about keeping the peace. It's about holding the vision. The unpopular truth is that many of the most important decisions you'll ever make will make people uncomfortable. Some will misunderstand you. Others will resent you. And in those moments, you'll feel it. The urge to backpedal, to soften your voice, to blend in again. But if you do, you lose yourself. And the role becomes hollow. Influence, without integrity, is manipulation. And the ones who manipulate may be liked, but they're never trusted. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, and who you truly are may not fit into the mold others built for you, especially not when you're leading. The moment you step into responsibility, you're no longer living for agreement. You're living for alignment with your values, with your clarity, with your internal compass that won't always match the mood of the room. And that misalignment, that tension between what's right and what's popular, is where true leadership takes shape. It's in that space that the pressure builds, not just from others, but from within. You'll ask yourself, am I being too harsh, too strict, too distant? And sometimes the answer will be yes. But more often, the discomfort isn't a sign you're doing it wrong. It's a sign you're doing it alone. And that's the cost. That's the tax for leading with integrity instead of charm. You carry the weight not of approval, but of clarity. And clarity often walks alone. What people won't tell you is that the crowd doesn't know what it wants until after you've succeeded. They'll question you on the way, doubt your methods, push back on your vision. And yet, when the result comes, when the dust settles, they'll rewrite the story. They'll call it obvious, predictable, inevitable. But you'll know the truth. You'll remember the nights you stood in rooms full of silence, knowing you were right, and wondering if it would matter. You'll remember the moments you felt completely unseen but refused to bend. That's not pride. That's responsibility. Seneca wrote, "It is the power of the 9. Loneliness versus solitude. Understanding the crucial distinction. Mind to be unconquerable. That's the inner steel leadership requires the strength to remain upright when others try to fold you. The discipline to choose silence when you're baited to react. The resilience to stay grounded when criticism comes dressed as concern. Because not everyone who questions you is trying to help. Some just want to see you shrink. And you will be tempted to shrink, to make your choices softer, more palatable. But each time you do, you chip away at the clarity that got you there. You dilute your vision just to ease the discomfort of those unwilling to carry their share of the burden. But leadership was never meant to be carried by consensus. It's carried by clarity, and that clarity must be protected, even if that means walking alone. That's why popularity becomes a trap, because the more you chase it, the more you lose yourself. The more you need it, the easier you are to control. A leader dependent on applause is a puppet. One shift in public mood, one wave of criticism, and they crumble. But a leader grounded in principle can't be moved by noise. They may feel it, but they don't fold. They listen, they adjust, but they do not surrender their core. Eventually, this becomes your identity, not because you chose isolation, but because you chose integrity. And integrity, by its nature, is lonely. Not always, not forever, but often enough that you must get used to the quiet, used to the silence that follows a hard decision, used to the tension that comes when you say no to what everyone else says yes to. But in that silence, something powerful happens. You stop needing their approval, and once you no longer need it, your decisions become sharper, your vision becomes cleaner, and your presence becomes undeniable. You'll still feel the sting when people turn. That's part of being human. You'll still question yourself. That's part of being wise. But what you won't do is fold because you'll have built something new. Opinion can break. A life aligned with truth, not trend. A voice anchored in principle, not performance. And when people finally see the results of what you stood for, when they come around and say they believed in you all along, you won't feel the need to correct them because the leader doesn't lead for applause. The leader leads so others can grow, even if that means growing without thanks, even if that means being the villain in their story for a time until they write a new one. So no, popularity is not the measure. It never was. Anyone can be liked. It's easy to be agreeable, but leadership means drawing lines in sand that will get washed over and redrawn again. It means making choices that won't make sense until the result appears. It means speaking truth in rooms that only reward silence. And most of all, it means being at peace with being misunderstood, knowing that your clarity is not up for negotiation. In the end, the people who follow won't follow because you made them feel good. They'll follow because you made them feel safe, because your strength gave them permission to find their own, because you didn't chase their approval. You led with conviction, quietly, unshaken, and that presence, that unspoken authority, speaks louder than any crowd ever could. There's a kind of strength that doesn't shout. It doesn't force its way into the room or try to dominate conversations. It just exists quietly, unbothered, unmoved. That kind of strength doesn't come from power or status. It comes from peace, and not the surface kind of peace you find in a vacation or a compliment, but a deeper one, the kind that doesn't depend on anything outside of you, the kind that stays with you even when everything else is falling apart. Because the real test of a person isn't how they act when things are calm. It's how they hold themselves when nothing is going their way, when the noise gets loud, when the chaos closes in, when the expectations stack up. That's when you find out whether you're grounded or just pretending to be. The world will always find new ways to pull you out of your center. Criticism, rejection, sudden change, pressure. And if you don't have an anchor within yourself, you'll drift. You'll react to everything. You'll get offended by everything. You'll try to manage other people's opinions, their emotions, their projections. And in doing so, you lose control not over them, but over yourself. The more reactive you become, the less influence you actually hold, because now you're being shaped by the very things you think you're trying to lead. That's the illusion of control, that you can change the external world by managing it directly. But true control doesn't work that way. It flows outward, not inward. You don't control the storm by shouting at the clouds. You control it by building something inside that no storm can move. That's where inner peace becomes more than a feeling. It becomes armor, not the kind that hardens you, but the kind that protects you without changing who you are. It takes discipline to live this way, to pause when everything in you wants to react, to breathe instead of lash out, to stay rooted in what you know instead of what you feel in the moment. It's easy to get swept away by emotion, especially when you feel disrespected, overlooked, or misunderstood. But that's the trap, because if anyone can pull you off course just by pushing the right button, then your peace was never really yours. It was conditional. It was borrowed. Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." That discomfort you feel when someone criticizes you unfairly or challenges you without cause, that's not just about them. It's a reflection of what inside you is still unsettled, still raw, still unguarded. And the more you use those moments to reflect instead of react, the more power you regain. Not over them, but over yourself. And that kind of power doesn't just protect you, it shapes the way people experience you. You become harder to provoke, not because you've shut off emotionally, but because you've mastered the art of keeping your balance. You start responding with precision, not panic. You don't rush to fill silence. You don't fight to win every conversation. You simply remain present, aware, and calm. And that calmness, it's magnetic. It disarms people. It makes them rethink their approach because they can't figure you out. And what people can't figure out, they begin to respect or fear. But the goal isn't to intimidate, it's to lead. And real leadership doesn't come from controlling others. It comes from setting the tone, from modeling what it looks like to stay steady when things get messy, from showing people that chaos doesn't have to define them. That peace is not weakness, it's authority. It's the kind of authority that makes people feel safe in your presence, even if they don't understand why, because you're not reacting like everyone else. You're not triggered like everyone else. You're still calm, grounded, in command. And here's what most people miss. Inner peace isn't passive. It's active. It's something you practice daily through the way you speak to yourself, through the way you manage your time, through the way you respond to your emotions when no one else is around. It's forged in the small decisions, the ones that feel invisible but shape your entire mindset. Choosing not to argue when it won't change anything. Choosing to walk away from what drains you. Choosing to slow down when the pressure says go faster. These choices add up. They become your foundation, your anchor. Seneca said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." And he was right. Most of the chaos we experience isn't in the world. It's in our minds. It's the stories we tell ourselves about what might happen, what they might think, what it might mean. And if you Don't learn to separate reality from reaction, you'll drown in your own thoughts. But when you're grounded, when your inner world is quiet, you start to see the difference. You stop creating problems that don't exist. You stop letting imagined scenarios steal your peace. And this shift affects more than just your emotional state. It sharpens your judgment. It makes your decisions cleaner, your actions more effective. Because now you're not chasing control, you're living from it. You're not wasting energy managing how you're perceived. You're using that energy to move with purpose. And that kind of movement doesn't need to be fast. It just needs to be intentional. That's what separates reactive leadership from powerful presence. The ability to move slowly, calmly, even when everything around you is speeding up. Eventually, people notice. They may not always say it, but they feel it. They feel the difference when you walk into the room, when you speak, when you stay quiet, when you say no without apology, when you lead without drama. It shifts the dynamic because now your presence speaks before you do. And in a world addicted to noise, presence is louder than volume. It carries further. It stays longer. So when the chaos comes, and it always will, don't meet it with panic. Don't let it dictate your mood, your tone, your choices. Return to yourself. Return to what you know. Return to your core values, the principles you live by, the calm you've worked to build. And if you lose that peace for a moment, don't beat yourself up. Just come back. Reclaim it. Protect it. Because that peace is your edge. It's what makes you rare, what makes you powerful, what makes you untouchable. Not because the world stops spinning, but because you've learned to stand still. Not because nothing moves you, but because you've mastered how to move through it. And that mastery, that quiet, steady, internal mastery, is what real leadership is built on. Not control over others, but calm within yourself. Always. Most people hear the word lonely and immediately picture sadness, emptiness, isolation, a lack of warmth, or 10. The practice of selective association, choosing your inner circle. Connection. But there's another side to it. A quieter, less understood side. Because loneliness in its purest form isn't always painful. Sometimes it's peaceful. Sometimes it's powerful. It becomes the rare kind of solitude that doesn't ask anything of you. It doesn't demand that you entertain, explain, or impress. It simply lets you be. And in a world that's constantly trying to mold you, that space where you don't have to perform, where no one's watching, isn't a punishment. It's freedom. There comes a moment when you stop fearing solitude and start needing it. Not because you hate people, not because you're bitter or angry or withdrawn, but because the noise becomes too loud. The expectations become too heavy, and you start to realize that the more people you surround yourself with, the more you're pulled away from who you really are. Opinions, assumptions, projections, they start to shape your choices, your voice, your identity, until one day you look in the mirror and you barely recognize yourself. That's when the silence calls, not as an escape, but as a return. The truth is the most powerful people in the world, those who move with certainty, who lead with calm, are often the most solitary because they understand something most people don't. You cannot know yourself in a crowd. You cannot build clarity in chaos. You need distance, Stillness, a space untouched by outside influence. That's where your real thoughts surface. That's where your true values rise. It's where you begin to ask, who am I when no one is watching? Who am I when I stop performing? And the answers, though quiet, change everything. Solitude gives you back your sovereignty. You get to act without looking over your shoulder, to speak without softening your words to make them easier to digest, to create without worrying if it will be liked, to live on your terms, not because you don't care about others, but because you finally care enough about yourself to stop diluting your essence. In solitude, you're no longer reacting, you're choosing, and those choices made without pressure or performance become the foundation of real freedom. Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." That line hits deeper than most realize. Because the worst kind of loneliness isn't when you're alone. It's when you're surrounded by people, but still feel unseen. When your soul speaks a language no one around you understands. When your silence says more than your words ever could, but no one hears it. That's the kind of loneliness that wounds. The kind that makes you question your place in the world. But the other kind, the kind you choose, is not a wound. It's a weapon. It's a way of protecting your vision, of shielding your energy, of building something that doesn't need validation to survive. You don't need to explain why you take time for yourself, why you skip the party, why you walk away from shallow noise to sit with deep thoughts. You just do it. And that unapologetic decision to stand alone, at least for a while, becomes a filter. It reveals who can meet you in that silence and who only wanted your presence when it was convenient or entertaining. There's clarity that comes when you're alone, not the kind that hits like lightning, but the kind that grows slowly, gradually, like fog lifting. And as it does, you see things you couldn't see before. You see the people who only reached out when they needed something, the ones who smiled but never listened, the habits that drained you, the places you went to escape yourself. And you start to make subtle shifts. You start speaking less and listening more. You start saying no without guilt. You stop chasing closeness with people who made you feel distant even when they were near. And then something remarkable happens. You stop being afraid of being misunderstood. You stop needing to be liked by everyone. You stop begging for someone to hear what you've been trying to say because now you've heard yourself. And in that space, you've built a relationship with the only person who will be with you for life. Yourself. That's not loneliness. That's alignment. That's the foundation of power. Because when you're no longer dependent on others to define your worth, you become untouchable. You stop shrinking to fit. You stop bending to please. You stand firm. Not hard, not bitter, but clear. This doesn't mean you reject connection. It means you raise the standard. You no longer settle for being half understood. You no longer give your time to people who drain your silence just to fill their own. You learn to enjoy company, but not need it. You welcome conversation, but you don't chase it. You share your truth, but you don't water it down to be digestible. You begin to walk a little lighter, not because life got easier, but because you're no longer carrying the weight of trying to be everywhere and everything. For everyone, there will be moments, of course, when solitude feels sharp, when The silence is louder than usual when you miss the warmth of another voice, the ease of shared laughter. That's part of the process. Even the strongest among us feel that ache. But strength isn't about never feeling lonely. It's about not letting that loneliness drive you back into places that made you forget yourself. It's about learning to sit with that ache and trust that it's not a sign of failure. It's a reminder of how deeply you feel, how much you value connection, and how sacred your energy is. Eventually, that space you once feared becomes your sanctuary, a place where you write, reflect, heal, a place where no one interrupts your thoughts, where your vision can stretch without limits. You begin to crave that stillness, not because the world has nothing to offer, but because you've realized that everything you were chasing out there was always rooted in something you hadn't yet found in here. And now that you have, you protect it like your life depends on it, because in many ways it does. So let them call you distant. Let them wonder why you disappeared. Let them misunderstand your silence. What they don't see is what it's building. What they can't hear is what it's teaching you. And what they'll never touch is the kind of strength that grows when no one else is around. Not because you're hiding, but because you're becoming. Not because you're broken, but because you're whole. And you're finally listening to the voice that's been drowned out by noise for far too long. That's not loneliness. That's liberation. That's the purest kind of freedom. The freedom to be fully yourself without compromise, without explanation. And once you've tasted it, you'll never go back. You'll never again trade your peace for company. You'll never again fill your life with people just to feel less alone. Because now you know being alone isn't the same as being empty. Sometimes it's the only way to be full. Most people chase attention like it's oxygen, filling every silence, responding to every message, showing up in every room just to be seen. But real influence doesn't work like that. It isn't about being the loudest voice or the most present face. It's about presence with weight, words that echo, appearances that matter. The more available you are, the less people notice you because anything that's always there starts to fade into the background. It becomes familiar, expected, and eventually taken for granted. That's why the most powerful people aren't always visible. But when they do show up, you feel it. There's something deeply human about craving what we can't have. It's wired into our psychology. Scarcity makes us look twice, makes us lean in, makes us wonder. So when someone holds their presence carefully, not out of arrogance, but out of intention, it forces others to assign meaning to it. Their silence feels mysterious. Their time feels expensive, and their attention feels earned. This isn't about manipulation. It's about understanding value. Because just like gold, the rarer your presence becomes, the more people start to treasure it. You become less of a constant and more of an event. It's easy to believe that in order to matter, you have to be everywhere, every social post, every conversation, every meeting. But that strategy spreads you thin. It makes your presence diluted, predictable, and influence, true influence, requires density, not volume. It's not about how often people see you. It's about how deeply they feel you when you're there. And when you're constantly available, constantly explaining, constantly proving, you rob yourself of that impact. The silence that could have spoken for you gets drowned in noise you never needed to make. Carl Jung once said, "The more compulsive a person is in impressing others, the less he is impressed with himself." That's the trap many fall into. Always showing up, always needing to be visible, always broadcasting. But the ones who command a room without saying a word, they've learned to let absence speak. They've learned that influence isn't about chasing admiration. It's about creating space for others to recognize your value without you having to sell it. They don't need to compete for attention because they've created an energy that attention naturally follows. There's a discipline in withdrawal, in holding back, in not reacting to every provocation or chasing every opportunity for visibility, because what you withhold becomes powerful. People wonder what you're thinking. They anticipate your input. They respect your timing. You stop being predictable, and that unpredictability makes you magnetic. You become the person who doesn't always speak, but when you do, people listen because you've trained them to expect substance, not noise, intention, not filler. And that difference sets you apart in a world that overexplains and underthinks. You also begin to see how much of your energy was being spent trying to be seen by people who were never really looking. How many times you showed up out of fear of being forgotten. How often you gave your presence away like it had no cost. But when you reclaim that power, when you start showing up on your terms, not out of insecurity, you realize something. People start chasing the version of you that no longer chases them. You're not just noticed, you're remembered. Not because you shouted, but because your silence said something they. 11. Silence as strength, the power of unspoken confidence. Couldn't ignore. Withdrawing attention also creates room for reflection. When you're not constantly performing, you can observe, you can listen, you can learn. You begin to move with precision instead of impulse. Your decisions become more deliberate, your actions more meaningful, and your words, when you finally choose to use them, cut deeper, land harder, and linger longer. That's the kind of presence that sticks. The kind people talk about even when you're not around, because you've become more than a person in the room. You've become a standard, a benchmark, a reference point for presence with purpose. And this doesn't mean you isolate yourself. It means you refine your timing. You learn that being everywhere isn't the same as being effective. That attention is not the prize. It's the byproduct of mastery. You don't need to insert yourself into every discussion. You don't need to be the center of every plan. You just need to move with such clarity, such self-respect that when you do choose to engage, it carries weight. And when you don't, it still carries meaning, because even your absence has become part of your influence. The shift is internal. First, you stop measuring your worth by how many people see you. You stop craving applause. You start building silence into your strength, distance into your strategy. And when you finally release that need to be constantly validated, you become something rare, something people can't quite define. That mystery, that quiet confidence is what makes them lean in. Because we don't chase what's always in front of us. We chase what holds itself just out of reach. What requires effort to understand what demands our attention without asking for it. You realize that presence is not a performance. It's an offering, one that becomes more powerful when it's not handed out freely, but reserved for moments that matter. And the people who truly see you, who truly value you, won't need you to be everywhere to feel your influence. They'll feel it in the silence, in the choices you make, in the spaces you know. Longer fill with noise. Influence, after all, isn't about being loud. It's about being unmistakable. And when your energy carries that kind of weight, you don't have to force people to notice. They just do. Eventually, people stop questioning your quiet. They stop mistaking your absence for weakness. They start seeing it for what it is: a deliberate withdrawal, a conscious move, a decision rooted in clarity, not avoidance. Because power isn't proven by how often you speak. It's proven by how much your silence says, by how people respond when you enter the room, and what they feel when you leave it. And the ones who understand this, who practice it, become impossible to ignore. Not because they chase the spotlight, but because they outgrow the need for it. So while the world continues to scramble for attention, posting, performing, shouting, you remain still, intentional, unbothered. You build a presence that doesn't shout for recognition, but commands it through restraint. You don't force your value onto anyone. You allow them to come to it on their own. And when they do, it's not because you beg to be seen. It's because your absence was loud enough to remind them what your presence felt like. And that is the kind of influence that lasts. In a time when everyone's fighting to be noticed, the ones who choose to be rare become unforgettable, because what's scarce isn't just desired, it's remembered, not for how often it showed up, but for how it made people feel when it did. Power is often misunderstood. People say it corrupts, that the moment someone rises, they turn cold or ruthless or self-absorbed. But the truth is usually more uncomfortable than that. Power doesn't create something new inside of you. It just turns up the volume on what's already there. It strips away the mask of politeness, the illusion of humility, the performance of virtue. It removes the need to pretend. And suddenly the parts of you that were once buried beneath fear or self-doubt begin to surface. Power doesn't corrupt. It reveals. That's why those who chase power without ever looking inward tend to fall apart the moment they get it. Because what they've been hiding from in the quiet, those unresolved insecurities, the lack of self-discipline, the hunger for validation doesn't disappear with success. It grows teeth, it spreads, and it begins to spill into every decision they make. The ones who become dangerous aren't the ones who hold power. They're the ones who never learned how to hold themselves. Because power in the hands of the ungoverned becomes a mirror, turned outward, and it reflects their chaos onto the world. But those who've done the inner work know better. They understand that the climb isn't about status or applause. It's a test. The higher you go, the more eyes are on you. The more your choices echo, the more your silence speaks. That's why the truly powerful disappear into themselves before they rise, not to isolate, but to understand, to clean the lens through which they see the world, to strengthen the hands that will eventually carry more weight. Because if the foundation isn't strong, no height is safe. Self-awareness is not a luxury at the top. It's a necessity. Without it, power becomes noise. Influence becomes manipulation, and leadership becomes theater. But when you've faced your own shadows, when you've sat in your silence and asked yourself the hard questions, power doesn't intoxicate you. It humbles you because you start to see how fragile it all really is, how easy it is to lose yourself in praise, how tempting it is to believe you're above correction, and how vital it is to keep returning to yourself for clarity. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That's the hidden trap of power. Without introspection, you start believing your impulses are wisdom. You confuse fear with instinct. You justify pride as principle. And before long, the very thing you once sought to master ends up mastering you. But when you bring your unconscious patterns into the light, when you catch yourself before ego takes the wheel, you begin to steer with purpose instead of impulse. Discipline becomes the quiet thread running through everything you do, not the discipline that shows off, but the kind that says, "No when no one's watching." The kind that builds when applause is absent. The kind that stays rooted when opportunities to exploit, impress, or dominate present themselves like easy victories. It's this type of inner restraint that separates real strength from loud ambition. Because power handed to someone without that restraint is like placing fire in the hands of a child. It burns more than it builds. And so the powerful retreat not as a sign of weakness, but as a preparation for presence. They create space to think clearly, to reconnect with principle, to remember why they started. They don't need to be seen to feel significant. They don't need to control others to feel in control, because they've learned that the hardest person to lead is the one in the mirror. And once they've done that, leading others becomes a responsibility, not a performance. A sacred weight, not a spotlight. The true cost of power is that you can no longer hide. The world looks to you not for perfection, but for clarity. And if your soul is cluttered, your leadership will be too. That's why arrogance isn't a byproduct of power. It's the echo of an unexamined self. And humility, contrary to what many believe, doesn't mean shrinking. It means understanding the gravity of your role and still choosing to move with care, to listen more than you speak, to think longer before you act, and to know that every choice casts a shadow, sometimes longer than you'll ever see. This is why the strongest leaders don't rush. They don't react. They respond. They carry silence like a blade. They move through conflict with calm, not because they feel nothing, but because they've trained themselves to feel everything without being ruled by it. They've spent years learning how to stand still in storms without collapsing. And it's that stillness, not their charm, not their charisma, that earns them respect. The tragedy is that many will only seek inner growth after they've been broken by their own power, after the position or the status or the influence has amplified their weaknesses so loudly they can't ignore them anymore. And sometimes by then the damage is already done. Reputations crumble, relationships fracture, trust dissolves. Because power without self-mastery always leaves a trail behind it. A trail of people who saw the mask slip, who heard the words that should have never been said, who felt the consequences of a person who never truly knew themselves. But it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to wait until power exposes you to begin that inner work. You can start now, in the silence, in the ordinary, in the daily practice of checking your intentions, of asking yourself what you're really after and why, of sitting with the discomfort that comes from realizing you're not as in control as you thought, but being brave enough to learn anyway. Because the ones who become unshakable are rarely the ones who began with power. They're the ones who began with self-respect. You learn to lead yourself before leading others, to hold your own emotions before holding authority, to guide your thoughts before guiding anyone's path. And when that kind of order exists within you, it's visible, without you even trying. People can sense it in your voice, in your stillness, in the weight of your presence. Not because you've built a persona, but because you've dismantled everything that wasn't real and rebuilt from the ground up with intention. So if you ever find yourself rising, whether it's in business, in influence, or simply in the eyes of others, remember this: what's behind your eyes will be seen. Not right away, but slowly, subtly. Over time, your habits will leak into your leadership. Your fears will echo in your decisions, and your insecurities will shape the way you treat those beneath you. That's the real weight of power, not just having it, but carrying it cleanly. And if you've done the work, if you've stared into your darkness and didn't flinch, if you've trained your mind to stay calm when chaos knocks, then power won't corrupt you. It'll clarify you. It'll illuminate the structure you've spent years building inside. And that kind of power, not the loud kind, but the quiet. 12. Walking away, the hardest form of discipline. Composed, anchored kind, is what creates change that lasts. Not because it forced people to follow, but because it gave them something real to follow, something rooted, something earned, something unshakable. At first, we're all chasing something loud: recognition, applause, attention. The eyes of others become our compass, and the noise becomes a kind of fuel. It feels good to be seen. It feels like progress. But as you climb through discipline, through silence, through trial, that noise begins to fade. The crowds thin out. The people cheering you on get busy with their own lives. And suddenly, you're left with something most never prepare for: quiet. The summit isn't crowded, not because few are capable of the climb, but because few are willing to continue without constant affirmation. The silence for many feels like failure, but for the wise, it's where the real work begins. There's a strange shift that happens when you no longer need to be celebrated. When you stop looking back to see who's watching and start looking inward to see who's guiding. The powerful understand this shift. They don't climb for the praise. They climb because they know that only in that quiet place can you actually hear your own thoughts. Only there can you face yourself without distraction. And that's the part most people miss. The top isn't a stage. It's a mirror. And if you've never learned to stand in front of it without flinching, you'll sabotage yourself the moment you arrive. The summit strips away illusions. It shows you whether your ambition was rooted in purpose or performance, whether your drive came from inner clarity or outer validation. Those who climb for image often crumble under the weight of isolation. They begin to question everything. They look for ways to descend, not because they failed, but because the silence was louder than they expected. But those who climbed with intention, they sit in the silence, not as punishment, but as peace. They understand that presence doesn't require an audience. It requires alignment. Carl Jung once wrote, "Solitude is for me a fountain of healing which makes my life worth living." That kind of solitude, the summit kind, is not just about being alone. It's about being so deeply connected to yourself that you're no longer desperate for connection from others. It's about knowing who you are without needing the world to agree. And in a culture that equates attention with value, that kind of self-possession is revolutionary. But make no mistake, the silence tests you. It will ask you to reconsider your beliefs, your motives, your identity. It will bring up insecurities you thought were long buried. It will challenge your patience, your confidence, your direction. And it will do so quietly, without drama, without chaos. Just a slow, steady mirror held up to your soul. And that's why so many turn back. Not because they aren't talented, but because they aren't ready to meet the person waiting for them at the top. The summit demands presence. It demands that you stop outsourcing your sense of worth, that you stop performing and start listening, that you stop collecting titles and start cultivating truth. And it's hard because no one is clapping for you anymore. No one is feeding your ego. No one is there to soften the blow when you realize that you've built your identity around being liked instead of being whole. The top reveals all of it gently, brutally, honestly. But if you stay, if you don't run from the silence, you begin to hear something deeper. You begin to access a kind of clarity that can't be taught. You begin to lead not with noise, but with presence. Your words slow down. Your decisions become intentional. You become more aware of your impact, not because others are watching, but because you are. That's the kind of leadership that lasts, the kind that doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. Because at the summit, you don't shout, you whisper. And those whispers carry further than the loudest noise at the base. They carry weight because they come from stillness, because they're not reaction, they're reflection. That's what people remember, not the ones who spoke the most, but the ones who meant every word, not the ones who were always visible, but the ones whose presence lingered even in absence. And maybe that's the paradox. You climb thinking you'll be more seen only to realize that the goal was never visibility. It was vision. You wanted others to understand you, but now you understand yourself. And suddenly, you don't need the world to echo your thoughts. You just need to live them, embody them, let them shape how you show up in every room, whether full or empty. This is the path that powerful walk, not because they are immune to doubt, but because they've made peace with it. They've stopped trying to outrun silence and started listening to what it says. They've stopped measuring their worth by the response they get and started measuring it by the alignment they feel. And in doing so, they build something few ever do. Self-rust. That's the real summit. Not the title, not the status, not the spotlight, but the unshakable trust in yourself to walk with purpose even when no one is walking beside you, to hold your vision when no one else can see it, to keep building when no one is watching because you're no longer climbing for them. You're climbing for something deeper, something that doesn't disappear when the applause fades, something that actually begins when the applause stops. And when people see you truly see you, they'll notice something different. You're not performing. You're not pleasing. You're just present, anchored, grounded in a sense of self that wasn't built overnight. It was earned in the quiet, in the hours when doubt crept in, and you didn't run, in the mornings when no one noticed, and you still showed up, in the moments when it was just you and your thoughts, and you chose to stay anyway. That kind of presence doesn't need validation. It doesn't crave attention. It radiates something more powerful, certainty. Not the arrogant kind, but the quiet kind. The kind that speaks even when you're silent. The kind that leads without demanding. The kind that transforms without needing credit. That's what the summit gives you if you're willing to stay long enough to receive it. So, if the path ever starts to feel lonely, don't panic. It's not a sign you're lost. It might be the first real sign you're on the right track. Because the higher you go, the fewer people there are, not because the view isn't worth it, but because few are willing to keep going when the crowd disappears. Few are willing to become whole in silence. Few are willing to lead without applause. But if you are, if you keep climbing, if you stay present, if you let the quiet shape you, you'll discover something most never do. That power doesn't come from being seen. It comes from being steady. That the summit isn't empty. It's full of meaning, of clarity, of truth. And you don't need anyone to hand it to you. You just need to arrive with your integrity intact, with your vision clear, and with your presence louder than any praise you left behind. The climb is lonely, but the view is yours. Not everyone will understand the silence you've chosen, but that silence is where your power speaks loudest. If this spoke to something deep inside you, there's more waiting. Watch one of the videos on your screen now. And thank you for being a part of Stoic Slumber, where strength begins in stillness. Building this fortress requires solitude, requires time alone with your thoughts, requires the willingness to face yourself without distraction or escape. You cannot build genuine inner strength while constantly seeking external validation or filling every moment with noise and activity. The construction happens in the quiet hours, in the moments of reflection, in the difficult choices made when no one is watching. This is why the path of self-mastery necessarily involves periods of intentional solitude. Not because you're running away from the world, but because you're building something within yourself that will allow you to engage with the world from a position of unshakable strength. The beauty of this inner fortress is that it's truly yours in a way nothing external can ever be. Your wealth can be stolen. Your reputation can be attacked. Your relationships can change. Your physical possessions can be destroyed. But the fortress you've built within your own character, within your own mind, within your own capacity for wisdom and virtue, that can never be taken from you. It travels with you wherever you go, provides shelter in any storm, remains standing when everything external crumbles. This inner fortress is constructed not with stone and mortar, but with disciplined thought, examined beliefs, and conscious choices repeated so consistently that they become your nature. Each time you choose virtue over vice, principle over convenience, long-term growth over short-term pleasure, you lay another brick in this invisible but incredibly powerful structure. Each time you remain calm when others panic, respond thoughtfully when others react emotionally, hold your center when others lose theirs, you strengthen the walls of your inner citadel. The concept of the inner fortress or inner citadel, was central to Stoic philosophy and remains profoundly relevant today. This is not merely a metaphor, but a practical reality you can build within yourself. A place of unassailable strength that no external circumstance can breach, no matter how chaotic the world becomes around you. Building this inner fortress requires consistent daily practice, unwavering commitment to your principles, and the willingness to stand firm in your convictions even when standing alone. 13. The inner fortress. Building unshakable self-reliance. Developing this balanced detachment requires practice and patience. You don't achieve it through a single insight or decision, but through years of consistently returning to the fundamental Stoic principle. Focus on what you can control, release what you cannot. Your thoughts, your choices, your character, your effort, these are within your control. Everything else, including how others respond to you, whether your plans succeed, whether circumstances favor you, these are ultimately beyond your complete control. Accepting this distinction deeply, not just intellectually, but in your bones, transforms everything. This balance between deep engagement and inner freedom is perhaps the most sophisticated psychological position possible. It allows you to give your best effort to everything you do while remaining unshaken by results. It enables you to love deeply while accepting the impermanence of all things. It permits you to fight for what matters while accepting that you cannot control outcomes. This is not coldness. This is wisdom. This is not detachment in the sense of disconnection. This is detachment in the sense of freedom. True Stoic detachment means loving people without needing them to be different than they are. It means pursuing goals with full commitment while accepting that results are ultimately not entirely within your control. It means feeling emotions fully without being enslaved by them, without allowing them to dictate your actions or destroy your peace. This is a subtle but crucial distinction that transforms how you engage with life. You participate fully, invest deeply, care genuinely, yet remain internally free. One of the most misunderstood aspects of Stoic philosophy is the concept of detachment. Many people mistake Stoic detachment for emotional coldness, for not caring, for being disconnected from life and relationships. But this misunderstanding reveals a lack of true comprehension of what the Stoics actually taught and practiced. Stoic detachment is not about becoming unfeeling or indifferent. It's about caring deeply while remaining free from being controlled by outcomes you cannot determine. 14. Detachment without coldness, the Stoic balance. Conclusion. The path forward. Walking alone with strength and purpose. As we reach the culmination of this exploration into solitude, power, and self-mastery, it's essential to understand that what we've discussed here is not merely philosophical theory or abstract wisdom meant for contemplation. This is a practical path that requires daily commitment, consistent action, and the willingness to make difficult choices that others may never understand or approve. The journey toward genuine self-mastery and authentic power is perhaps the most challenging path you can walk, precisely because it demands that you walk it largely alone. The Stoics who came before us, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus, they didn't develop their philosophy in comfortable academic settings or peaceful monasteries removed from the world. They forged it in the crucible of real life, under the most intense pressures imaginable. Marcus Aurelius practiced Stoic wisdom while bearing the crushing weight of an empire, while dealing with plague, war, betrayal, and the constant demands of power. Epictetus developed his understanding of freedom while experiencing the extreme opposite, slavery and physical disability. Seneca refined his philosophy while navigating the treacherous political waters of imperial Rome. What they all discovered, what they all came to understand through direct experience, is that genuine strength comes not from accumulating external things, not from wealth, not from status, not from the size of your network or the applause of crowds. Real power emerges from the cultivation of inner resources that no external circumstance can touch or diminish. It comes from knowing yourself so deeply that others' opinions, while heard, no longer define you. It comes from being so grounded in your own truth that the shifting winds of popular opinion cannot knock you off balance. Starting today, beginning in this very moment, you face a fundamental choice that will shape the entire trajectory of your life going forward. You can continue seeking power, validation, and security in external things, in other people's approval, in the comfort of crowds, in the temporary safety of going along to get along. Or you can begin the more difficult, but infinitely more rewarding path of building genuine power from within, of developing the kind of strength that remains unshaken regardless of external circumstances. This path of self-mastery and willing solitude is not for everyone. Most people will choose the apparent safety of the crowd, the comfort of conformity, the ease of not having to stand alone with their choices and their convictions. And that's perfectly fine. There's no judgment in recognizing that different people are called to different paths. But if you've read this far, if something in these words resonates deeply with your soul, then perhaps you're one of the few who recognizes that the conventional path of seeking power through accumulation and association is ultimately hollow. The journey ahead will not be easy. There will be moments of profound loneliness, times when you question whether you've made the right choice, situations where the path of least resistance looks incredibly appealing compared to the difficult work of self-mastery. You'll face criticism from those who don't understand, rejection from those who feel threatened by your growth, and the constant temptation to return to the comfort of the crowd. But each time you choose the harder path, each time you maintain your boundaries despite pressure to abandon them, each time you stand firm in your truth while others bend to social pressure, you strengthen something within you that can never be taken away. Remember that walking alone doesn't mean being isolated from all human connection or rejecting all relationships. It means being so complete within yourself that you can engage with others from a place of wholeness rather than need, from strength rather than weakness, from genuine care rather than desperate attachment. It means developing the discernment to know which relationships truly serve growth and which merely provide comfort at the cost of your evolution. It means having the courage to be misunderstood by many in order to be truly known by the few who matter. The Stoics have shown us the way forward. They've demonstrated through their own lives that it's possible to achieve genuine power, not the brittle, fragile power that depends on others, but the unshakable strength that comes from within. They've proven that solitude, properly understood and embraced, is not a punishment or a sacrifice, but a gift, an opportunity to become so clear in your purpose and so strong in your center that external chaos cannot disturb your peace. So take what you've learned here and begin applying it today, in small ways at first if necessary. Practice saying no to demands on your time and energy that don't align with your highest purpose. Start creating space in your life for genuine solitude, for deep thinking, for connecting with your own inner wisdom. Notice when you're seeking external validation and gently redirect that energy toward internal approval. Observe when you're maintaining relationships out of obligation or fear rather than genuine connection, and have the courage to release what no longer serves. The path of self-mastery is walked one step at a time, one choice at a time, one moment of courage at a time. You don't need to transform everything overnight or make dramatic announcements about your new direction. Simply begin walking and trust that each step forward, no matter how small, is building the foundation of genuine power within you. The crowd may thin as you rise, but your vision will sharpen. The applause may fade, but your inner peace will deepen. The comfort of constant company may disappear, but the strength of self-reliance will emerge. Walk this path with purpose. Walk it with courage. Walk it with the understanding that while you may walk alone, you walk in the footsteps of the greatest minds in history who chose the same difficult but rewarding journey. The power you seek is already within you, waiting to be uncovered not through accumulation but through refinement, not through addition but through subtraction, not through surrounding yourself with more, but through becoming more yourself. This is the way. Walk it with unwavering commitment. Walk it alone if necessary, and discover the unshakable strength that has been waiting for you all along. Epilogue. A final word on walking alone. As you close this guide and prepare to walk your own path, remember that the journey towards self-mastery is not a destination but a continuous practice. Every day presents new opportunities to choose strength over comfort, solitude over crowd-pleasing, authenticity over approval. The path doesn't get easier with time. You simply get stronger, more capable, more aligned with your true nature. There will be days when walking alone feels unbearably lonely, when the temptation to return to the comfortable crowd becomes almost overwhelming. In those moments, remember why you chose this path. Remember that genuine power comes not from surrounding yourself with people, but from becoming so complete within yourself that you need nothing external to feel whole. Remember that every great philosopher, every profound teacher, every truly powerful individual in history had to walk substantial portions of their journey alone. The world needs people who have the courage to stand alone, who have developed their inner resources so thoroughly that they can offer genuine strength to others without demanding anything in return. The world needs people who can maintain their center in chaos, who can think clearly when others panic, who can act from principle when others react from emotion. By choosing this path of self-mastery through solitude, you're not abandoning the world. You're preparing yourself to serve it from a place of genuine strength rather than neediness. So walk your path with confidence. Walk it with purpose. Walk it with the understanding that while you may walk alone, you're never truly isolated. You walk in communion with every seeker of wisdom who came before you, every practitioner of philosophy who chose growth over comfort, every individual who valued truth over popularity. The path is ancient, well worn by countless feet, yet each person must walk it for themselves. No one can walk it for you. No one can give you the strength you must build within yourself. But the path is there, waiting, and with each step forward, you become more of who you were always meant to be.